Hello, friends. Welcome to today's class. I'm Nikayla here, if you don't know, and I am the host of the Side Hustle Pro podcast. And I'm so excited that you decided to spend your Thursday afternoon with me. Come on in. We're about to get started. Let me go ahead and share my screen so you can see today's slides. And go ahead and just give me a 1 in the chat if you can see my slides. I would love to make sure that everybody is good. All right. So today is all about the 5 podcasting secrets that you must know if you want to grow your show and make money. Basically, my goal is to let you know what you should really be focusing on in podcasting because there's a lot of misconceptions going on. So the goal for me today, like I said, is to really share with you what is working, what you should be focusing on. There's a lot of noise in podcasting, and you might be trying to do all these different things at once. So if you hone in on these 5 core principles, you are guaranteed to grow your show and grow it faster. So if you don't know me, I want to share a little bit more about my story, how I got into podcasting. So essentially, I I come from a very traditional background. If you come from immigrant parents, if you're an immigrant yourself like me, you know that I was born in Jamaica. I grew up in the Boogie Down Bronx, and I was focused on my books my whole life, just school after school, high school, undergrad, grad school. So I was just expecting to go along the corporate path. Never did I see myself as someone who would be a full-time entrepreneur and podcaster, right? But here we are. So it might seem like on the road to podcasting, I have done a lot of things right. But in actuality, I have done a whole lot of things wrong. So this was me in May 2015. I'm sitting here in front of my MBA school, the Ross School of Business at Michigan, and I look pretty happy and accomplished, right? I'm in my cap and gown. I got my Mary Janes on, and I'm smiling. But what you don't see in this picture, and this is why it's so important to look beyond highlight reels, is that inside, I am freaking out in this picture, actually, because in this very moment, I had been rejected from my Google internship, which I had between the first and second year of my MBA program. And I was graduating with no job to speak of, and I was moving back to DC to live with my then boyfriend, now husband, with no money. When I tell you I spent all my money just gallivanting during my business school years, traveling to Europe, doing all this stuff because I thought, okay, I'm going to get a high powered job and just start saving again, start racking it up again. But that didn't happen. So your girl was masking a lot of shame. How could I let myself get here? How could I be graduating like this and broke? And all I knew was I just had to start doing something. So once I got back to DC, I said, as I look for these jobs, as I'm getting these rejections, let me start doing something that makes me feel good and also that I'm good at. If you listen to my show, Side Hustle Pro, I talk about the fact that in this low moment, I actually polled my friends and I asked them, what am I good at? Because I felt so low just being unemployed and having such a hard time getting a job. And they all pointed me back to my writing, my social media marketing skills. And I said, cool, got it. Let me start doing this to build up my portfolio. Maybe I'll attract some employers. Who knows? So I started doing that. I knew I wanted to build my personal brand. At that point, it was all about getting a job. Like, how else am I going to get a job, right? Unless I build my personal brand. So even though I wasn't sure what that entailed, I took the next best step. I started following online branding coaches, people who were one step ahead of me. I'm sure many of you are doing that right now, just being in this class. And I actually, at that point, relaunched my blog. I had a blog before, didn't take it seriously. So I relaunched my blog, and it was kind of tacky. This was some of the artwork I was creating. At that point, I had content, but really no purpose, you guys. But the important thing was that I got started, right? I just got started. So I hope, again, that also encourages you. Oh, you can't see any slides? Hold on one second, guys. All right, here we are. So I'm going to go back a little bit since you can't see the slides and just make sure that you really see how happy I was looking out there. First of all, you got to see this cute picture of me growing up in Jamaica. This is us in front of my mango tree, right? And then this was me in graduation. Like I said, I look so happy, but I'm freaking out. I'm rejected from my internships. I'm graduated with no money, no job. And then I get back to blogging. And I learned a lot from following people one step ahead of me. So I relaunched that blog. No real purpose at the moment, but I had the content. And I got started, put one foot in front of the other. So the key thing that I learned at that time was you have to be willing to take the first step, even when you don't know where it will lead. So how many of you guys are like going through this thing of life and you want to know how it's going to turn out before you take the next step, right? You want to know, is my podcast going to be successful if I do this? Am I going to be rich if I do this? Like, you want to know everything, right? But that's not actually how it works. And ask me how I know, right? So stepping outside of your comfort zone is where the magic happens. I know I don't like doing it either. I'm actually an introvert. I'm like, I love my comfort zone. But I have learned that you have to do a bit of it at least to get to the magic. So I continued to blog at that point, and I started realizing where the common thread was for me. For me, I love sharing the stories of Black women side hustlers and entrepreneurs. At that point, after some months and months of searching, I had finally gotten a job at NPR in Washington, D.C., National Public Radio. And I was so burnt out of applying for jobs, and I was low-key kind of traumatized by it. I said, you know what? I am never relying on an employer again. It was kind of like I was in a relationship, but my guard was all the way up. And I was like, I see myself being an entrepreneur. I am never going to be caught out there again with someone being able to fire me. And so it really lit a fire in me to be independent. But I didn't know how to go about it. I was not the kind of person who liked not having money. I experienced that already, didn't like it, wanted a steady paycheck. So I said, I need to be a side hustler and I need to learn from people who've done it already. So that's when the idea for my podcast, Side Hustle Pro, was born. So I launched this podcast in 2016. A year before launching Side Hustle Pro, I didn't know what a podcast was. I didn't listen to podcasts until someone told me to listen to a specific episode of The Read in 2015. Before that, never really knew. I just heard the word, thought it was jargon, right? A year later, look at me, launching a podcast in June 2016. And in the first 7 days after launching Side Hustle Pro, I landed in the top charts. So here on the left is Side Hustle Pro top 10 in marketing. And here on the right is Side Hustle Pro top 50 in business, number 37 to be exact. And if you look closely, I am a few spots above someone who I learned from, Amy Porterfield, right? I showed you her in the brand coaching slides. So it just goes to show you what happens when you apply the things you learn from your mentors. Side Hustle Pro was even featured on Apple Podcasts. This is Side Hustle Pro in the new and noteworthy banner for the episode I did with Myleik Teal. And then over here in the Bold Women category, so when Apple does these collections, Side Hustle Pro started getting included in Women and Black History Month and all those kind of things. And I went really hard on promotion that summer. From the minute I launched my podcast, I took it very seriously. I was not here to dilly-dally. I got on the ground. Okay. So I actually printed up t-shirts and I wore this uniform to every conference this summer. I also wanted to kind of test out what it was like to print merchandise. You can see these weren't the best quality, but again, just stepping outside the comfort zone, just taking the first step to see where it leads. So I realized that I was onto something and that if I took it seriously, I could quit my job. And that was my whole motivation to go so hard at that point. I started studying, guys. I started studying podcast monetization. I could not find anyone teaching podcast monetization. This was this was 2016 at this point still. So I invested in courses to learn more about how to pitch sponsors. I even invested $1,197 in a 2-day event sponsorship intensive. This was about event sponsorship. It's a completely different world, but I piece together what I could to start pitching podcast sponsors. Again, it wasn't podcast specific. So since then, I have learned what they really look for and what to really put in your media kit. And I include that inside of Podcast Moguls. But it didn't matter because I was eager at that point to learn anything at all about sponsorship. So 6 months after launching my podcast, I pitched my very first sponsor cold, meaning I didn't know anyone at the company. I actually pitched like an info at email address from their website, the generic inbox. And the pitch was so good that they forwarded it along to the marketing and promotions team. And that ended up being the first sponsorship relationship I built. I earned my first $4,000 podcast sponsorship contract. And something I realized I forget to mention when I say this is this was a reoccurring client. Like this client became a recurring sponsor for multiple years on Side Hustle Pro. So this was not just one flat $4,000. They kept re-upping month after month. So by this time, I was developing a whole revenue stream. I was pitching hundreds of sponsors a week, and I had saved and built up a revenue stream such that I was able to quit my job in December 2017. And I actually did a podcast episode about it. This was the post on Facebook. If you want to go back and listen, you can go over to this episode and, that's the URL. You can go over to Facebook and see like this was what I was able to do. And this was in only a year and a half into podcasting. I was able to quit my job to podcast full time. So it's absolutely possible, you guys, but you got to go ham. I got to be honest, but I'm going to teach you how and what to focus on. So again, Side Hustle Pro has been featured. Side Hustle Pro, we've been ripping and running through these publications, featured on the Today Show, featured on Oprah Magazine, Forbes. And then in 2022, Side Hustle Pro was inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame. This is me at the ceremony. So how do I go from this girl who's masking shame, totally confused about what she's going to do next, graduated with no job and no money, to the Podcast Hall of Fame? And how can you do it as well? All right, let's get into it. Let's get ready to learn my top 5 podcasting secrets that you must know if you want to grow your show and make money. Okay, so let's get into secret number 1. So essentially, secret number 1 is there is a formula, you guys. There's a formula to how you name your show. So a lot of people go into the naming process and they don't spend enough time on it. Like, be honest, if you've already started your podcast and you started your show, you probably wanted to just get started and you didn't think that it was going to be that big of a deal. You're like, people are going to get it, right? Wrong. You have got to make your podcast title memorable and understandable. What do I mean by that? Well, most podcasters, they keep their podcast super broad so they don't put themselves in a box. And they also start these general conversation podcasts with the homies and make their podcast title vague or a play on words or even a play on their name. I actually did that myself. And it is going to hold you back. So let me give you an example. And also, a lot of podcasters these days are like launching these in-person video podcasts before they even master audio podcasting, which is really interesting because when you do that, you make it hard for people to find your show and you make it hard for people to know what your show is even about. And so then you're going to waste a lot of money on overhead costs before you start making any money from your show. And I don't want you guys to do that. So here's what you should do instead. Make your podcast title memorable and understandable. Get to the point, y'all. Get to the point. There is a formula that I teach inside of Podcast Moguls, and I'm going to share with you. Essentially, you have to make sure at least one of the keywords that people are searching to as it relates to your topic is in your show title. Stop being vague. So I know how tempting it is to make a cute, catchy title. Like, this is not a advertising jingle though. So before my blog at first was Kayla K Speaks, a twist on my name, Nikayla, but no one could pronounce it because they were saying Kalia. They thought it meant I was a speaker. I was not. I was a writer. So I needed to pivot. And eventually I landed on Side Hustle Pro through doing the work. So again, it's okay if you don't know and you start. I want you to start more than anything. But what I help you to do is to shift into something that is going to increase the visibility of your show, is going to attract more listeners. So this is what I did for my own show. And this is also what I do for my Podcast Mogul students. So this is Erica. So Erica came into Podcast Moguls. She had a podcast already, and she just wasn't seeing the download she wanted for this podcast. So she couldn't figure out how to get more visibility for her show. She had a show about grief and infant and pregnancy loss, a very impactful topic, needs to be heard, needs more people to be aware of it. But no one is searching for Erica and McAfee, right? They're searching for the keywords related to those topics. So with the title of her podcast being the Erica and McAfee Show, she was doing a huge disservice to her audience because they couldn't find her. And that's what this comes down to. You are here and your content is actually serving a need for your listener. It could be something light, like they just look forward to that show each and every day so they can laugh, or each and every week so they can laugh and get some enjoyment and feel like they're kikiing with girlfriends. Or they could really be using your show to learn or get through a difficult moment. And if they can't find it, you should think about it as you are not serving. You are not responding to your calling because they cannot find you. So Erica had to rebrand. And when she came into Podcast Moguls, once she went through the lessons, she rebranded with a more targeted title and artwork. So Sisters in Loss, again, playing on the loss theme. And the key word, by the way, the formula can also apply to your description. So she made sure that her podcast description was very, very specific to, again, let her target listener know what the show is about, what she means by sisters in loss. She even has in the artwork some African print behind this yellow. I hope you guys can see that. And so it's all these different signals to let people know as they're scrolling, as they're searching, hey, this show is about sisters dealing with grief. So once she did that, her downloads tripled. All because she went into the formula. You get it? All right. So you guys are saying that you cannot see my slides again. Okay. Only Danny Marie is saying that. So guys, just let me know if you can see the slides. Give me a 2. All right. A lot of people see them. So just refresh. Okay, Danny? All right. Cool beans. So now let's talk about secret number 2. Speaking of audience, you need to clearly define your audience. So most podcasters also do this. They try to target everyone, all women, all men, all millennials, all Black women, all mothers, all Gen Z. Let me know in the comments on a scale of 1 to 10, how good do you think you have, how good of a job have you done with targeting your audience? Are you doing an all women or all this kind of a thing, or have you gotten more granular than that? I would love to know. So rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, how well you think you've done with targeting your audience. I can't wait for these to come in. So here's what happens when you do that, though, when you make it too broad. You make it hard for people to know your show is for them. You confuse people by talking about a different thing each week. And you waste a lot of time spinning in circles trying to figure things out. So here's what you should do instead to clearly define your audience, okay? You have to clearly define, meaning you need to know exactly who you want to talk to. So I want to share Tolu's story. So Tolu Garcia, she came into Podcast Moguls and she actually didn't have a podcast. She had a lot of ideas, but no podcast. So for those of you who are wondering, oh, do I need to have a podcast already to be here? You can be at all stages. You can absolutely just be in the camp like Tolu of still kind of fleshing out what your show will be about. So Tolu, once she went through the Podcast Moguls lessons on refining your topic, she decided to launch a podcast about UI design. UI is user interface design. She works in user interface design. She totally nerds out on that subject matter. And she felt and knows that there are not enough people of color in that world. So she decided to call her podcast the UI Narrative Podcast and to share those stories. And you know what happened? She got very clear about her target audience, and she made sure that her podcast description shares that target audience and shares exactly what her show is about. And even the artwork and the name, for people in that world, it immediately clicks when they see that. It immediately clicks. You might not be in that world. I'm not in that world, so it might not click for us. But all that matters is it clicks for her target audience. So once she did that, within months of launching, Google came calling to sponsor her show. So Tolu is an indie podcaster. She started small. She didn't have hundreds of thousands of downloads, but because she was clear on who her audience was and Google wanted to get in front of this audience, it was very easy for them to, one, find her. Again, why your name is important. If they're searching for UI podcast, they found her because she used the formula and made sure at least one keyword was in the title of her show. And then not only that, but they wanted to give her money. They came calling to her. I teach my Podcast Mogul students how to pitch, and she didn't even have to pitch. They came to her because she did her work so well. And that's what I want for you guys. All right. That's what I want for you guys. So, all right. So I'm seeing some of the ratings. Oh, Emily said 2. Oh no, Emily, we got to work that. We got to work that out. Okay. So thank you guys for being honest. So if you are not doing a good job targeting your perfect listener, as I call it inside of Podcast Moguls, I want to help you with that because that is a really important step. I would say that is the most important step in podcasting, because if you're trying to talk to everybody, you can't grow your show. If the people you're trying to talk to can't find you, you can't grow your show. So, oh no, Franchette with the 1. All right. We got some work to do, you guys. But Tolu, again, by going through these lessons on refining your topic and identifying your perfect listener, she was able to do this work and Google came calling. So that is a really important part of what you should be focusing on. Now, secret number 3 is you need to also be crafting captivating social media content to grow your audience. And I want to stop the share for 1 second because I really want to make sure you guys understand why this is so important. Oftentimes when I talk to or hear people, we talk about social media, it kind of gets a bad rap, and people just think about the work that goes into it. And the idea is if you are doing it right, it should not be work. Because if you are doing it right, you're able to schedule and kind of put social media on autopilot. But you do have to do some upfront work. I won't lie to you about that. You do have to do some upfront work to get to know who you need to talk to and to find those people online, and then to start creating the content that they want so that you can make the most of your time and just be creating content easily over and over again that you can schedule out. So now that I've clarified that, I want to go back and to share my slides. So secret number 3, you need to craft captivating social media content to grow your audience. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. So I want you to know that a lot of people, you think you need a lot of followers on Instagram to grow your podcast. That's not it at all. And that's not what I want you to focus on. And a lot of people also think that your Instagram feed needs to be like perfectly color coordinated with filtered photos and the perfect sequence. It's not that either, even though we love Queen Bee and her coordination. But here's what happens when you think that, though. You don't even try to create content, and then you miss out on opportunities to share with your audience or to make money. And then your audience and opportunities remain stagnant. And I want more for you. All right. So here's what you should do instead to grow your podcast. You need to craft captivating social media content to grow your audience. So I want you to hear Shanitria's story. Shanitria came into Podcast Moguls and she already had her podcast called Blunt Blowing Mamas. One of my all-time favorite podcast names, you guys. One of my all-time favorite. I'm not going to lie to you. So Shanitria, even though she has this awesome name, and again, includes a keyword that people are searching for, she was struggling to grow her audience and to expand her reach. So she used the Podcast Moguls OMG formula. There's a formula for everything, you guys, to explode her Instagram following. And she's since gone from starting the program with 3,000 followers to she is now up to 115,000 and counting on Instagram. And what she did is she identified what worked for her audience. And that's the O in OMG, obsessively auditing, right? What is your audience connecting with? What kind of content? And then going out there and implementing that, using that to inform your strategy. Now, the growth that you will see will come over time. And Shanitria talks about that. Actually, a few times ago, when I promoted my show, promoted that I was doing a webinar, she said, she, without me even asking her, put this in her IG story. And I told her, can I share this? And she said, sure, go ahead. And she just wrote, Side Hustle Pro is an amazing podcast coach. As someone who's one of her Podcast Mogul students, I can truly say she helped me get Blunt Blowing Mama podcast off the ground. Grow BBM's IG page. She says herself, I only had 3K followers when I started her program. And through her techniques, I've grown organically. And that is a really important part, because I know sometimes you think I got to spend a lot of money. And yes, I teach you how to do ads as well, but you can grow organically without being on the content hamster wheel. You just have to be strategic, AKA create the content that your people want, know who your people are, first of all, and then create the content that they want. So this is what I want to teach you to do. So that's what Shanitria was able to do. She honed in on the fact that, hey, my audience really loves when I break things down, when I break down facts, but in real format. Now, if you hear the word reels and you start freaking out, don't worry, okay? Actually, reels are not the best performing content on the Side Hustle Pro page. And Side Hustle Pro content still does amazingly well, because I make sure that I test and I study what works for my audience. Shanitria did the same for her audience. Like I show you how to do. You have to learn the strategy and the formula to test how to know what's going to work on your page. But once you zoom into that, it's off to the races. So that's what happened for her. She doesn't even spend a lot of time on these. She will bulk create. So if she goes on vacation, she'll do some recordings of her walking on the beach back and forth, slap some audio on top of that. And then now she has all this B-roll that she can use anytime she wants to create an IG reel. And then one Saturday, if she's sitting at home and she has like an hour to spare, she can batch create those and schedule them out. You can schedule via third-party scheduler, or Instagram actually lets you schedule directly if you have a business account. So that's it right there as far as creating captivating content. It does not have to be that hard, and it does not have to take that long. You just need to know who you're talking to and what they want. And because of that, Shanitria has amplified her reach. Like I said, she has an engaged community of over 115,000 people who now know about her podcast, listen to her podcast, listen to her Instagram lives, and pay her for workshops, pay her for her Patreon. Again, all revenue streams, if you're paying attention, on top of if she wants to have sponsors on her show on any particular episode. So that's secret number 3. I know some of you guys are excited about that, because let me know, if anybody here feels like absolutely just, what's the word, exhausted when you even think about social media, I can help you, because I actually really love it. And I like to make people like it too. All right. So secret number 4, let's get into secret number 4, which is all about, you need to have a mission when you start this podcasting stuff. Podcasting, I know it seems like, oh, we should just get into it and have fun and, podcast over drinks or whatever. So most podcasters do start podcasts for fun, especially, back when we were in that thing that shall not be named. People started more podcasts, right? They were home. They were like, might as well. But here's what happens when you do that. You don't have a higher purpose that pushes you to keep going. And you got to keep going through the slow times, through the beginning. Remember, you're starting from scratch, so you're not going to be paid right away. You need to be able to push through that and think, no, this is my mission, this is my calling, and I'm pushing through because it's deeper and bigger than me. And if you do that, then you're on the right track, because when you don't do that, you miss out on opportunities to be of service. Back to that service word, you guys, we are serving with our podcast. So here's what you should do instead. Connect your podcast to your deeper mission in life. I know it sounds a little deep, but it is deep. Like, my mission in life is to help people get unboxed, to stop thinking that we have to fit our lives into these boxes that society has created, and to understand that success and life can look however you want it to look. That's my personal mission in life. And so that's why I love podcasting with side hustlers who have created their own businesses, creating their own life paths. What's yours? Think about that. What's yours? I want you to meet Marina. So Marina is a Podcast Mogul student, and she recently shared something with me that's so awesome. I had to share it with you guys. This is coming out of our last Podcast Moguls coaching call. She shared this with me. So Marina also did not have a podcast when she joined. She just had a deeper mission in life to teach young girls financial literacy. She was so passionate about that. And she was just like, Nicaila, what do I do? How do I put this together? How do I package this into a podcast? So going through the lessons, she launched her podcast, Banking on Girls. Love that name as well. Again, includes a keyword, doing the formula. And this is what she shared in our last coaching call. She just went on the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women and spoke about her podcast. This was in March 2024. She spoke at the UN, you guys, all because she started a podcast. I'm so excited about that. Like, you don't understand how you could change your life by starting a podcast, but this is what Marina has done. And she continues to grow her show and impact girls in a positive way. So that is the secret too. You got to have that mission, y'all. You got to get unboxed. You got to have that mission, whatever it is for you. Now let's get into secret number 5 so we could get to Q&A. So secret number 5 is you can make money from your podcast without sponsors. You actually don't need sponsors. The sponsorship game, it can be lucrative, but it can take some time to work up to it, right? Because they were looking at downloads and average downloads per month and CRM, all kinds of jargon that you might not want to hear right now. And let me tell you what most podcasters think. So most podcasters think that you need a lot of followers or downloads to make money from podcasting. As you saw with Tolu, that's not necessarily the case. You can be starting out and attract major brands if you position your show correctly. But here's what happens when you think that. You miss out on clients or customers who want to pay you, and you miss out on opportunities to be of service. Is going to keep coming back up because that's how much I feel passionate that podcasts are service. So here's what you should do instead, though. Launch a podcast that serves your ideal client. Think of who you want to hire you. Create a podcast for that ideal client, or a podcast that will appeal to who that ideal client is hiring for and what they're hiring for, right? Let's say they're the organizer of a conference you want to speak at. Make sure you're creating that content with them in mind. Make it valuable and useful, and then launch a product or service for your ideal client. Your service could be speaking. Your service could be a course. Your service could be, speaking of service, let me show you a service from a Podcast Mogul student. So this is Lori's story. And I had to find a way to fit in Lori because I just love this picture and this hat. So Lori came into Podcast Moguls and she actually had a podcast already, but it was not targeted. It was not strategic. I believe it was called, I can't even remember the name anymore. Again, memorable, right? That is the key thing your podcast name needs to be. So she came in and she joined Podcast Moguls because she wanted to learn how to make money podcasting. And here's what she learned. Because her podcast title and her podcast itself wasn't targeted and wasn't specific, she couldn't make money with it. So here's what she did. She actually relaunched an entirely different podcast and has since quit her full-time job as a tenured professor and moved to Spain in 2021. She launched that new podcast using her Moguls training, and it's pretty much a sales funnel to attract creative writing students and coaching clients. So fun fact about Lori, she's actually an accomplished author, but it's always been her side hustle. She was a tenured professor, and if you know anything about tenure, that means you have your job, you have job security. They can't fire you. So most people are not walking away from that kind of job unless they have a sure bet on what they're doing. So the fact that her podcast was a sure bet is tells you everything you need to know. So what she's done is she now has a podcast. It's called Read, Write, Create, and it helps other authors learn how to make a living as writers. And she teaches them how to be ghostwriters as well. So that is just so amazing. She actually hit me up when she launched this, and no, a few months into launching it, she's like, I need to just tell you how Podcast Moguls has changed my life. One day she's living in Philly, the next she's in Spain. Like, how crazy is that? And that's really just the power of podcasting. And why I'm personally am so passionate about it is because I just know what my life was like before I discovered podcasting, and I know what my life is like today. I can remember, by the way, like just sitting at my desk and getting this "can you come to my office" message from my boss. This was back in 2017. It was a few months before my wedding. So here I am at my desk, like secretly trying to do some wedding planning. I get this email and I'm like, you know how your stomach just drops, your heart drops, because I had noticed her giving me a strange look and kind of looking at some papers and glancing at me. And I'm like, is something about me? I was like, what's going on, right? You know, when you get that weird vibe from somebody. So then she goes in her office and she sends me this email. I'm like, oh, God. So I go into her office, right? To say I was stressed is an understatement because this was a new boss. She had just joined the team like a month prior. The boss that I joined with had left. And so here comes this new lady already calling me into her office. I'm like, oh, God. Right. So I walk into the office and I wasn't fired or anything, but that's the day I knew I needed to make a decision. And I needed to choose between my side hustle and my full-time job. Because when she called me into her office, she shared that she had just learned about my podcast. Remember, my old boss who left, he had already known about it because it was on my resume, but she didn't know about it. She felt that I was doing something sneaky, and that's where my passion really was and where my focus really was. Even though I was killing it at my job, had just gotten a bonus. This is what she said to me. And I felt so sick inside that that's the perception that someone would have of me. She even said, perception is all that matters. And I felt so sick inside that that's the moment where I said, I went back to that feeling I felt when I was unemployed. Like, I will never, ever allow a job to just rip the rug from underneath me ever again. Like, I'm going to do this and no one's going to make me feel bad for starting my podcast. Like, I'm not choosing my side hustle over my job. So that's when I knew I had to ramp it up. That's when I started pitching 100 sponsors a week, and I started getting regular sponsorship income. I launched my first online course by that December. I knew I was launching it, so I knew that revenue was going to come in, and I just got really focused on my revenue streams and my savings because I knew I wanted to quit. I decided to bet on me. And then that is why in December 2017, a full year and a half after starting my podcast, I was able to quit my job. And that was the impetus behind it as well. So if you're wondering, like, you don't have to quit, I felt like I needed to for my mental sanity and my peace. So again, this was back to that reminder of you have to be willing to take the first step, even when you don't know where it will lead. I'd never been an entrepreneur before. I'd never worked for myself before. Of course, it's scary. Of course, it's like, oh my God, what if the checks stop coming in? And all this stuff was running around in my head. But I can't let fear be my guiding light. Like that's not how I want to live my life. So that's why I said, reminding myself that stepping out of your comfort zone is where the magic happens. And as you can see, boy, has it been magical. And it's worth it, y'all, because starting a podcast is the most effective way to have career freedom. You don't need to quit your job. You don't need to make it a full-time business. But if you're trying to make some kind of pivot right now, starting a podcast is the most effective way to make a pivot. I have had students start the program and they now work in podcasting and they now work for major podcast networks. I've had students like Lori who completely finally leaned into their life's passion and their life's work and is now able to live in the country they've always wanted to live in. So what pivot do you want to make? By the way, put pivot in the chat if you're trying to make a pivot, because I would love to know, if you guys are in that space in your life right now. I've seen people who have been in their careers for years and years and years doing Podcast Moguls, and it's completely changed their life. Even Tolu, who started the UI Narrative podcast, she now teaches and does more educational work around UI. And she says it's because Podcast Moguls honestly changed her life. So for me, podcasting gave me the freedom and flexibility I've been looking for. This is me on my honeymoon in Zanzibar, which, by the way, I couldn't take when I got married because I didn't have enough vacation days. But because I quit my job and podcasting allowed me to do that, I was able to go on this honeymoon of my dreams a year later. So delayed gratification is still gratifying, y'all. And now today I work from anywhere. My husband Moyo and I were both certified side hustlers, juggling parenting, careers, and our many entrepreneurial passions. So flexibility is huge for us. We now have 2 kitties. So it's really huge. When I had a job, I had little to no family leave. Podcasting allowed me to stay home with my son for his first 2 years of life while getting paid to podcast. This was me pregnant with my daughter last summer. Able to work from Jamaica, where we took our baby moon, and podcasting allows me to work from anywhere while getting paid to podcast. So if you're serious about taking that next step and making a pivot in your career and life through podcasting, then I really think that Podcast Moguls is for you. So I'm going to share a little bit more about the program now so you can just get a sense, because, okay, I'm seeing the pivots. I'm seeing the pivots with exclamation points. Let's talk about how you can pivot. So Podcast Moguls is now open for enrollment. By the way, you can head over to sidehustlepro.co/join. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat for you guys in a bit, or someone if you want to put that in there. So inside of my Podcast Moguls coaching program, I teach proven strategies to podcasters who want to have a hit podcast, grow an audience, and make money from their podcast. So Podcast Moguls is for you if you want to launch your podcast, or if you've already launched and you want to grow your podcast, if you want to monetize your podcast, and if you want to get coaching from me. I coach my Podcast Mogul students personally. And by the way, coaching never ends. I just had one of my very first OG Podcast Mogul students from 2018 email me because she wanted to kind of thought partner about what she should charge for these live podcasts she started doing at, someone's organization reached out to her to do a live podcast. And so I was able to share my advice with her. So you get the benefit of always being able to reach out to me for coaching. I just wanted to share that because I found that so funny. All right. And the process within Podcast Moguls, part 1 is an actual course itself. It's an 8-module podcast success curriculum. It includes video lessons, on-demand tutorials, templates, swipe files, guides, you name it, workbooks. It's very, very robust. I'll go over what's actually in the modules in a second. And then part 2 is the community itself. We have a private community where you can ask your questions, get answers outside of our group coaching calls, and post your wins, your challenges, get feedback, all of that. I'm very active in the community. And then part 3 are the actual coaching calls. So we meet monthly for video group coaching calls. Again, with me, I'm answering your questions live. You're workshopping, you're bringing your challenges, you're bringing in your questions, and I'm happy to help you guys. So this is what's inside of the course itself. Module 1, refining your topic and finding your perfect listener so you can be more targeted in your approach and grow faster and get paid faster. Module number 2 is positioning your podcast. So we get into the actual branding elements there. So again, you can attract that perfect listener and get them to grow your show, plus get paid faster. Module number 3 is the actual launch if you haven't launched yet, or relaunch if you have need to rebrand and launch again. Module number 4 is how to market your podcast. So that's when we get into the formula, what really works to grow on Instagram and all these social media platforms, what really helps to get a quote unquote viral content piece. Module number 5 is how to grow that email list. So growing your email list is extremely important. But first you need somewhere that directs people to your email list. So we learn how to grow our social media presence. Then we learn how to grow the email list through lead magnets and freebies. Module number 6, I get into actual Facebook and Instagram ads if you are ready to do advertising. And then module number 7 is when we get into monetization, how to position yourself for monetization. And module number 8 is how to create your winning pitch to pitch sponsors. So that's what's inside of the actual course itself. This is what Shirley of the She's Got Drive podcast had to say about the actual course. She said she joined, and I had at that point 25,000 downloads. And in the last 3 months, I'm now at 46,000 downloads. Her strategy absolutely works. So again, Shirley is someone who came in with a podcast, and she just didn't know how to get her listeners and how to grow. And I was able to help her do that. And she's continuing to thrive. And then this is what Fritz of the Coin Gamma podcast had to say. He says, I was able to speak at over 5 conferences last year, even being flown in internationally to speak at conferences. It all came because of the podcast. All right. So here's what you're getting inside of the program. So again, our monthly live coaching sessions, which is valued at $4,000. If you were to just get 4 private sessions with me, it would be a value of $4,000, but then you're getting coaching from me for life. Technically, you only get 4 with your enrollment, but I never turn anyone away when they want to come back to our live group coaching calls. It's not like I cut off your membership in 12 months or anything like that. Speaking of that, you have annual community access. It's not limited to a year. You also have all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kits, ones that are tailored to podcasts, and the formulas that you need to share with those sponsors to share your downloads and to share your average monthly downloads. All of that's included. You guys know I paid $1,197 just for that, but that's included within your payment for Podcast Moguls. Plus, I also include my guest pitch templates. I've seen this by itself cost upwards of $597 just to get the insatiable pitches that are going to make people say, yes, I want to be on your show. That is included as well. Plus, you also get my Master the Gram program, which by itself, if you go over to Master the Gram right now on Side Hustle Pro, it's $297 just by itself. But I include that for all my Podcast Mogul students. Additionally, you also get the Goal Getter Action Plan, which is my productivity course, so that as you are going through this program, you know how to structure your time to get it done. And that's included with your enrollment. So all of this, if you're counting it up, and if you didn't pull out your calculator, I'll do it for you. That is a total value of $8,553. Of course, I'm not going to charge you that. The cost of Podcast Moguls by itself, if you were just to go over to the website right now, is actually $3,000. But there are only 2 options to join. You can pay in full for $997, or you can pay over the course of 4 months for $297. You get the promotional rate when you come to these classes, and you are able to take advantage of this promotional rate for the next week. So this price does expire next Friday. And by the way, I have some fast action bonuses for you guys. Now, if you pay in full, you automatically get the fast action bonuses. If you join right now while we're on this call at any level, you will also get the fast action bonuses. So let's break it down a little bit more. So I am going to share with you my pitch email that landed me that first $4,000 in sponsorship. All right. And then that recurring revenue over and over again. So if you want to take the guesswork out of your pitches, if you're trying to figure out why you can't seem to land sponsors, you need this. You need this template. Plus, I will also share with you as a fast action bonus, my 5-day branding blitz that landed me in the top charts in week 1. This by itself, I sell for $297. This allowed me to come out fresh out the gate with these strategic steps to land in the top chart. So if you don't want to try to figure out the Apple and Spotify algorithms on your own, you need this. Okay. And plus, I'm also going to provide you with the pitch email that I sent to Apple that landed my podcast in the new and noteworthy section. Fun fact about podcasting, you have to learn how to be your own publicist, all right? When you see people in these lists and these categories, they can just wind up on them. They started forming relationships. They started putting their show in front of decision makers. And that's what you need to do. So I'm going to give you a pitch email that you can use for Apple, for Spotify, or any decision maker that you want to get your show some higher visibility in these platforms. So that's a fast action bonus. And then finally, I'm going to give you the pitch email that landed me my first international speaking engagement in Barbados. So I was flown out to speak in Barbados, got an all-inclusive vacation on top of that. And this pitch email is ones that I've used to get paid for speaking engagements that have garnered me $5,000 a pop. Like my rate is $5,000 and up, and $5,000 minimum. So these are but you got to get good to command that. But these are the pitch emails I actually use to get in front of these organizers and bring attention to my expertise and what I can speak about. So that is also a fast action bonus. So just to break it down for you again, here's everything you're getting with Pay in Full. And head over again to sidehustlepro.co/join. Very simple, just /join. Let me get this up for you guys. Someone go ahead and hyperlink that for me. I'm going to hyperlink it in a second. All right. So you can do a four payment plan. It just will not include the fast action bonus. So I understand, you might not be prepared to spend the full $997 today, but I do highly encourage it because again, it includes all of these awesome bonuses that allow you to just kind of to minimize the learning curve that comes with podcasting and just get right to business, get right in front of the people you need to get in front of, and to really start leveraging yourself and your brand. Now, I know when it comes to like money and what to spend on stuff, like I'm not here to tell you how to spend your money at all. I will tell you an equation I use though, right? So I make like at least like one big investment in my business a year. And by big, I don't mean like tens of thousands of dollars. Anytime I buy a program from $1,000 to $2,000, I still do this equation. So would it be worth it if is my equation. So would it be worth it if, and then after that, I fill in the blank with what I'm trying to achieve. Only you know what you're trying to achieve. I can guess, right? So I can guess, would it be worth it to you if you could surpass 100,000 downloads in a few months like my student Nia did? So Nia Clark has the Dreams of Black Wall Street podcast. When she launched it, she came into our private community to share that she had surpassed 100,000 downloads in just 4 months. She said, when I started this project, I didn't know how it would be received because let's face it, talking about race in America, you guys, I have students who talk about everything from race to blunts to UI, everything, coins, cryptocurrency. You can start a podcast about everything and I'll show you how to market it. And so she didn't know how it would be received. But not only did it surpass 100,000 downloads so fast, but then the BBC News reached out to her to interview her and produce a 4+ minute short video with her. Isn't that amazing? And by the way, Nia came into the program with another podcast. I don't remember the name because it wasn't targeted and it wasn't strategic and you can't make money from it. So she is another student who came in, fleshed out a whole new topic, launched a whole new podcast. And then she had this to say. She said, I have to say, I really was not expecting my podcast to take off the way it did. I could never imagine my podcast would do that well. And really, it's because of what I've learned in Podcast Moguls. So I really, again, encourage you to come on down to sidehustlepro.co/join to join Podcast Moguls today. I would be honored to work with you. I would love to work with you to make sure that you are serving the target listener you need to be serving. We're about to get into Q&A, but I want to remind you that you do have options, right? So option one is you can keep trying to DIY your podcast with tips gathered all over social media and YouTube. And we know that it's a little dicey, right? Because not everyone shares their results. Some people just speak really convincingly, but we don't know what their results are. We don't know how much money they're making. But option two is you can decide to make podcasting a priority and get my coaching to know exactly where to start and what steps to take. So if you want that option number two, you know what to do. Go over to sidehustlepro.co/join. I really was not meaning to rhyme and sound corny, y'all. That just came to me. So again, this is the recap of everything you're getting: monthly live coaching, annual community access, all of my sponsorship pitch letters and my media kits, my guest pitch templates, plus Master the Gram, plus the Goal Getter Action Plan. The deadline to join at this promotional price is next Friday, May 10th, and you can head over to sidehustlepro.co to join. Let me go ahead and stop the share for a minute to drop this link. Absolutely, this will be shared with you and sent out to you in your inbox, okay? Right after this, I'll make sure that we send it out to you guys. Oh, I accidentally pulled up this screen. So let me just make sure that I give you guys this link as a hyperlink. So you got it. Okay, here we go. And let's see if I can pin this. Yay, you guys are so welcome. So now I'm going to jump into Q&A, okay? Let's jump into Q&A, and I'll make sure that I keep the screen up so you guys can go ahead and see the screen as well. All right. So deadline to join May 10th, 2024. So now let's jump into Q&A. All right. Danny Marie says, do you believe there is anything different about the landscape in 2016 versus now? What are those different things? Also, when you launch your pod, were you still working at NPR? So first question, yes, absolutely. The landscape has changed. Podcasting is just seen as such a dynamic field with so much opportunity now. Back in 2016, it was on the heels of Serial launching, the Serial podcast launching, and it doing so well, and people starting to pay more attention to podcasts. So yes, people were launching podcasts, but there weren't as many as we see today in 2024. But I see that as a good thing. I like to compare it to the movie industry or the TV industry. Like, podcasting is just another medium. It's media. So there should be a lot of content. You never see people saying, oh, there are too many movies, or, oh, there's too many TV shows. Like, no, there's always, you run out of something, you finish listening to your episode, you want to listen to another episode of something else, right? So there's never been a better time, I think, to start a podcast. And then as far as yes. So I launched my podcast in 2016. I had started working at NPR in 2015, December, and I left in December 2017. Remy says, how long did it take you to get to 1,000 downloads? I'd say I was at 1,000 in the first week, Remy. What specific avenues helped you achieve this? Was it promoting on social? Did you have an email list already, etc.? So I was promoting on social. And I detailed this in the bonus 5-day branding blitz, by the way. So I did a countdown. I made sure that every single person I ever knew in my life knew that I was launching, but I did it strategically. I didn't have a email list before I decided to grow the show and take it seriously. So what I did is I reached out to all my contacts. I said, this is a one-time email. I had them opt in if they wanted to stay in the loop about what was coming. I told them what the content was going to be about. And I share that process with you in the Grow Your Email module, because sometimes we think growing your email, it has to be something that's so hard. It starts with that first 10 people, then you grow it to 100. You know, I like to set goals in terms of 5x. So you grow it to 100, then you work on the next 500. And so forth and so forth. And that makes it more realistic, more achievable. Remy also said, my podcast is titled The Driven Introvert. Would love your thoughts on this. So I would need to know a bit more about that. Now, getting into a podcast title, you guys, this is something that I don't take lightly. Like, I have to do a deeper dive than just like, oh, here's my topic, tell me if it's good or not. I can't tell you that without knowing who are you trying to target, right? Because that's who needs to understand what your show is about. Who are you trying to target, and what are you trying to tell them? What's the purpose of your show? So off the bat, I can say, I know introvert is a keyword. That's great. That's awesome. However, I have no idea what your show might be about or who it's for. So that is problematic and something we would want to fix. We would want to make it way more strategic. We want to make it way more clear what your show is about and who's it for. Moranike, hello, says, please, can we get a replay of this? I'm at work and couldn't really focus. Oh, thank you so much for letting me know. I absolutely will be sending out the replay. Fun fact, because I work for myself now, I am able to do these in the daytime, but I know that some of you guys are tuning in from work or it's doing your work hours. Unfortunately, with my two kids, I can't do it at night anymore, but I am going to make it on demand so you guys can watch it at any time. Christine says, can you unpack the patrons and workshop, the Patreons? So I think what you're asking is about Shanitria's workshops and Patreons. The great thing about the fact that you can use your podcast and you can make money outside of sponsorships is you can create a workshop around anything that you have expertise in, or an expertise. My definition of that word is you are a eager learner of this topic and you want to share your learnings and invite other people to come along with you on that journey. So that's what I mean by expertise. I don't mean you went to school and got a PhD in something. Okay. So your workshop can be anything you have expertise in and also that your audience is interested in. And you can test out those ideas. The great thing about really honing in on who your perfect listener is you can talk to this person. When they start following you on social, people will be DMing you. Oh, I love that episode. You can say, hey, what did you love about it? You can say, what are you working on? What side hustle do you have? Are things that I've come to learn about my listeners, so I know what to develop. And you'll start to see questions come in over and over again. So Shanitria started seeing some of the same questions coming over and over again. So she decided to create some workshops on those and a series of workshops and then charge for that. And then with Patreon, especially as it relates to when you are public facing, as we are with podcasts, you might not always want to share everything on your podcast. But with a Patreon, you can have subscriber only content that is more intimate and that people pay for, so you know that they're there because they truly rock with your show and they just want more content from you and they're not a narc. So that's that. Shakira says, can you share the slide? Oh, that was from before. Yes. All right. Toby wants to know, you mentioned audio and video podcast. Should I be more focused on audio? Started out. Yes, you should be more focused on audio, Toby. But at the end of the day, there's two things going on in podcasting right now. One, because there's so much video, we've seen an upsurge in people consuming podcasts on video. Whereas before in 2016, they were definitely consuming more on Apple Podcasts and other listener apps. So yes, if you have the bandwidth, you could do it, but you don't need to prioritize it. If you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have to go out and get a bunch of equipment, because it slows down the process. It slows down the process in the beginning if you're only going to podcast when you can record a video, especially if you're trying to do in person. It's going to slow you down. And I don't want it to slow you down. And also, if your goal is to make money based on your audio stats, then prioritize the audio. Laura Westergaard says, will there be a recording? Yes. Recording's coming. Anonymous attendee says, I'm eager to learn how to create podcast content for others and direct shows for podcasters. Whoop, whoop. I'm proud of you knowing that you want to do that. Like that takes, and for being here to figure that out, because it's a growing field. You shared, can your program help me with that? I'm not ready to podcast myself. I want to be sure, but the business excites me to learn before the show, and I enjoy writing. Is content writing essential for podcasters, or can others handle that aspect? Thank you. I'm a fan of your show. Thank you so much. She says, my go-to started my morning while running errands. I am honored. And you know what? This really excites me. What you just said is absolutely smart. It's such a growing opportunity. And don't get scared when you see, like, every now and again, some podcast studios will have layoffs, but that's mainly because people are so excited about this space and they see the opportunity that they often run to start these studios. They start spending all this money on these shows that aren't yet making money. And so they overextend themselves. They hire too much staff and then they have to get laid off. So if you're going to work for somewhere, make sure they actually have a plan for their podcast business, so that when times get rough, they don't start firing people and get scared. So that's one aside, but it's a really growing space. And I think what you're doing is smart, and you absolutely can learn what you need, because not that I want you to go and, but I know you won't do that. That's not what I'm saying. You absolutely will help how to we'll learn how to help others. A prime example is one of my podcast moguls, Hiwate. She has a podcast called Depth and Candor. So she started Podcast Moguls to grow out that show. And that's Depth, Depth, not death. So she started it to grow that show, but ultimately learned like, I love producing podcasts and I really like the actual experience of it. So then she went to work for some major podcast studios and has been thriving in that world, completely changed her career trajectory. So like I said, the pivot, y'all, the pivot happened. And make sure y'all are going over to this link, okay? And going over to sidehustlepro.co/join. So come on down. Let me know when you join. Judith Rapley asked, do I ever do one-on-one sessions? I do VIP podcast coaching. And so that, if you'd like to inquire about that, I will tell you that is $5,000. So if you kind of want to switch gears and just do VIP, you have to meet the qualifications, meaning that you're at a certain place with your podcast. But that's another option that I offer. Or you could join Podcast Moguls over at sidehustlepro.co/join, because I absolutely do continued group coaching, very high touch. You're getting me in the group. You're getting me on our coaching calls through email if you have something to reach out to. I love talking to my Podcast Moguls. I just do. Alrighty, so a few more questions and then we have to wrap up. Danette says, how can I be more efficient to make this a great moneymaker? Personal mentoring, please. All right, Danette, so I just shared about VIP coaching. If you want to learn more about that, go to hi@sidehustlepro.co. But honestly, if you are still in like a more beginner stage, and if you've been doing your show for less than a year, or you are just really new to the podcasting space, I really recommend joining Podcast Moguls, because I'm covering all the foundational pieces that you may just not be aware of. Like I showed you with those secrets, understanding how to title your show, understanding the formula so that you're not making your life harder by having to explain what your show is about. Understanding the formula so that it immediately clicks for both your audience and sponsors. That's what you want, that immediate click, okay? And understanding how you do that is what I want to teach you so that you can make money, because that's what it comes down to. So many people are making their life hard and they want to make money from a show that is unclear. You can't make money from a show that's unclear. So personal mentoring is done within Podcast Moguls as well. And then you also have the lessons so that you can do your homework and then start to change and grow. Franchette says, do you assist with the podcast titles? Yes, you can share your podcast titles inside of our group coaching or inside of the community. And what I like to do, I want to make sure that you know that this work has to be done by you, but I show you how to do the work. I'm not leaving you out there, but it is work that comes down to your core desires in life. So I can't say, oh, name your show this. Like someone can't, if I started out and I said, is Kayla K Speaks a good name, right? I would have advised me back then to get clearer on who I want to talk to, what stories I want to share on my blog. Only I can do that work, right? So I wouldn't have been able to tell old me, oh, name it Side Hustle Pro, because I wasn't even clear yet on that content. I was talking about marketing trends in one post. I was interviewing people in tech in another post. And it's only after I said, okay, let me really hone in on and only do the content I enjoy the most. That's when I got clear. So it's going to start and primarily be on you. Danny says, what mic are you using? I am using the Shure SM7B. By the way, I go over all my equipment inside of the program as well. And I do high, medium, low tier costs, because this was something I invested in 5 years into podcasting. I was not using this when I started. Remy says, how soon after launching your podcast can you send a free offer to get listener emails? You can send a free offer right away if you're ready to. But if you want to just get into the rhythm, then I recommend just focusing on launching first, then focus on listening to the feedback and you will get the feedback as you are implementing the social media formulas. And then from there, you can determine what offer would work. What I have seen happen when people try to do an offer too soon is they're basing it on what they want. They're like, all right, I'm gonna create this and then I'm gonna make this. I'm gonna get them on my list and then I'll make this much money. No, it really comes from what your listener wants to know, What do they need? What question keeps coming up for them? So you need to do some listening before. But if you know your audience previously, before you launched, and they were asking you for something before you launched, then that's what I mean by you could potentially launch with an offer. Ooh, my throat's getting a little dry. Okay. Ashley says, what are your thoughts on doing seasons versus dropping an episode every single week? I love the idea of doing seasons. At NPR, I worked with a lot of shows who did seasons. And the key with seasons is you need to have a strategy for your off season. So, meaning you need to tell your audience, hey, this is the season. We're wrapping up this day, but don't worry. Stay tuned all summer for sneak peeks or snippets, or I hope you'll watch these rewinds or reprises, as some people call it. It's kind of like a season of a show, right? They'll run reruns in between, and you have to decide what you're going to do. Don't just go off the grid. Don't just ghost your audience. Never ghost your audience. So that's the only thing you have to be mindful of with seasons. You do need to plan some content for the off season, or you need to run reruns. Monica May says, I have 2 separate podcasts. Is that okay? Let's Spill the Tea is for mothers and daughters. Second, in more community affairs oriented. That's One Take Live. Yeah, you could have 2 podcasts. I would recommend that you share a little bit more with me about what your goal is with the 2 podcasts. So some people come in, and I even know fellow podcasting peers who have more than one podcast. So I'm thinking of one woman who she has a really successful podcast. Actually, both of them are really successful, but one of them is more of a money driver, more visibility, more diehard audience, and that's because it's more clear who it's for. Whereas her other show kind of just comes off as not comes off, but it's more of like it's named after her and her co-host. And so you can see, like, people aren't searching for their name unless you're like a celebrity. People aren't searching for your name. So there's that discoverability hurdle that makes that show harder to find. But for that one, she's doing that more for the joy. And yes, if it makes money, awesome, whatever. But then her main show is the one that is making money. So I'd love to know what your goals are with both, and if you want to do both and monetize both. All right, 3 more questions. And guys, again, let me know when you join. If you have any other questions, head over to stylehustpro.co/join. I can tell that from our conversation today that many of you guys would benefit a lot from being inside of Podcast Moguls. So I hope that you will make that investment in yourself. Danny Marie says, I struggle with compartmentalizing my content. Question, what content is great for social versus webinar versus podcast? Oh, Danny, that's pretty broad, right? That's pretty broad. Like, when it comes to that, I would love to know what you even mean by content, right? I don't know what you mean by content. So we have to start there. Like, what do you mean by content? And what are you trying to post on social versus webinar versus podcast? And then ultimately give you the disclaimer that, or the big secret that it all comes down to your audience. When you create something and you put it into the world, y'all, it doesn't matter what you like. It no longer matters what I like. I heard a chef actually describe this the other day. I was watching a video about this bakery chef, this young African-American woman. And she's like, when I became a chef, I realized it doesn't matter. She's a pastry chef. She said, when I became a pastry chef, I realized it doesn't matter what my favorite cake is. The customers came in and this is the fan favorite. So this is what I need to make. So that is it in and of a nutshell. Like, it doesn't matter what content you think is great. What does your audience think? What is their fan favorite? And do more of that. Now, Ashley Roberts, last 2 questions. Ashley says, how do you manage posting on multiple platforms, X, TikTok, YouTube, Shorts, IG? I know you can schedule, but with most of them, you can't add trending music or anything. Are you talking about Reels? So with Reels, with anything, yes, I do schedule, I batch create. Yes, that means that sometimes I do not ghost, but there are times when I'm more productive with that than others. But I've built up my platform to a point where I can kind of take a break. And that's what I want for you guys too as well. Like, when it starts going on autopilot, you shouldn't be in a hamster wheel to begin with. So now that I know that, I'm able to teach you how to do that, but also you're able to take breaks when you schedule. So that's number 1. Yes, I schedule. And then if you're trying to create posts with video, that's just all that will require is for you to schedule on the actual platform. So like I said, you can schedule on Instagram, you can schedule on the platform itself, on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, you will have to be more mindful if you are using music and if you're doing reels with music. And I want you to experiment, because actually these days you don't even need music to make reels do really well. So lean into your own voice, lean into you showing up for your audience as you, and don't be confined to music or overly reliant on music. You can also get rights-free music that is rights-free across all platforms. So there are places like Epidemic Sounds and other platforms like that, where you pay a monthly fee and you have music that you can use across platforms. And then final question is from anonymous attendee. She shares, I was on a podcast as a military spouse, and they took what I said and made it into another podcast. Now the podcast is no more, and they wanted me to produce it without pay. What advice would you give if you can't hear? I'm confused. I'm a little confused by this. So I can't really give advice because I don't know what is happening. All right. What do you mean they took what you said and made it into another podcast? Do you mean another podcast episode, or do you mean you gave them an idea for a show overall? And then as far as they want you to produce it without pay, well, what do you want to do? I know I don't want to work without pay. So if you want to work without pay, you let me know. So it sounds to me like you don't want to do it, and that's perfectly fine. It sounds to me like you can do your own podcast and you don't need to work for anybody else, because you got the brains and got the idea that you know what? If you have one idea, you can have 10 more. So if you are also asking what should I do because someone else took the idea I gave them, come up with another one. And I bet you they won't even, if they're asking you to produce, they might not even be able to make it work. But overall, remember, y'all, don't ever worry about competition or someone else starting to do something you're doing. There are lots of side hustle podcasts. There are a lot of Black women podcasts these days. No one can do it like you, and no one can be in your brain. If you have one idea, there's 10 more where that came from. And that is the note I want to end on. I cannot wait to work with y'all inside of Podcast Moguls. I really enjoyed our session today, our class today. Remember, the fast action bonuses are going away. So if you want to join before it ends, go ahead and do that. And with that, you guys, I want to bring this to a close. Thank you for joining me, and I will talk to you later.